My name is Amelia Hart, and I live in a three-bedroom brownstone in Boston, Massachusetts. I bought it for $1.2 million after my software finally turned a profit. I still remember that first night I slept there. I walked from room to room holding a warm mug of tea, touching the door frames like they were treasures, and whispering to myself that I had made it. It was not just a house to me. It was proof that I had turned long nights of coding, blurry eyes, and endless self-doubt into something real. It was a symbol of independence. Every brick felt like mine, not gifted, not borrowed, but earned. The journey that brought me to that house began years earlier. My dad, Richard Hart, had started Hart Industrial Supply out of a rented garage in Newark, New Jersey. He sold replacement parts to small factories in Ohio and Pennsylvania. He was the kind of man who prided himself on old-fashioned grit and phone calls, but as the years passed, the company stalled. By the time I graduated with a degree in computer science from Boston, Hart Industrial was barely pulling in $50,000 a year. It wasn't failing outright, but it was small, fragile, and vulnerable to every change in the market. When I returned home, I offered to build a software tool to track orders and invoices. My dad was skeptical, but he gave me 3 months to prove myself. I set up a folding table in our living room, bought a second-hand laptop, and started writing code. I was 22 then, with nothing but caffeine, determination, and the belief that technology could save the family business. Those first lines of code became the foundation of everything. By the time I turned 26, the project had grown far beyond a simple tracker. I had hired 8 engineers, signed a small office lease in Boston, and retained a contract lawyer to protect our work. I named the platform Beacon because it brought clarity and light to everything that had been messy. Beacon tied together orders, payroll, shipping, forecasts, vendor payments, customer churn, and compliance reports. Everything existed in one place, and suddenly Hart Industrial Supply had control where there had only been chaos. The breakthrough moment came during a brutal winter storm. Highways from Maine to New York were shut down, and trucks couldn't move. Our competitors were paralyzed, losing up to 30% of their deliveries. But Beacon had a different plan. It rebalanced our inventory, automatically issued purchase orders to regional partners, and rerouted shipments with speed no human could match. That week, we lost only 2% of our deliveries, and that difference changed everything. New clients called us in desperation, and once they saw how efficient we were, they stayed. For the first time, people in the industry were talking about Hart Industrial Supply as a leader, not a follower. Those years of growth were the happiest of my life. My dad ran sales. My younger brother, Evan, joined operations. I oversaw product and risk. We fought in meetings, argued over numbers, and sometimes even yelled, but at holidays, we hugged and laughed like family should. I believed in my heart we were building something together, a true American success story. Then came the day that should have been the crowning achievement of all my work. I was invited to New York to meet with a global investment fund, Grant and Wexford. Their partner, Oliver Grant, flew in from London and sat across from me in a sleek glass office overlooking Midtown. He was calm, polished, and intimidating in that European way, but when I showed him Beacon, he leaned forward like a child seeing fireworks. He told me he wanted a global supply contract. The deal was worth $100 million in the first year alone, with options for more. Hearing those words felt surreal. $100 million. I tried to keep my voice steady, but my hands trembled under the table. He wrote the figures in pounds and dollars on a sheet of paper, and I felt the weight of every hour I had spent coding by myself, every late night in that Boston apartment, every tear of exhaustion. It had all led to this. I had built something powerful enough to impress not only America, but Europe as well. When the meeting ended, I stepped outside into the cold New York air, my head spinning. I immediately sent the signed term sheet to my dad with a short message. We did it. I thought he would be proud, thought he would call me, thought he would tell me that all of the sacrifices were worth it. That night, I returned to Boston and walked slowly past my brownstone. Snow was falling in soft sheets, coating the sidewalks and softening the edges of the city. I thought about my mom, Laura, who had always told me not to let anyone talk over me. She used to pack my lunch and slip little notes into the bag, reminding me that I was capable. I smiled, imagining her face when I told her we would open a new office in London and that I wanted her to see it with her own eyes. Inside my brownstone, I placed the term sheet under my pillow like a child hiding treasure. I had never slept so soundly. For once, the future seemed clear. We had grown from a garage company scraping by on $50,000 a year to a global contender pulling in $300 million. And now, with this new deal, we were about to enter the next level. I believed we had reached the safe part of the story, the part where the family celebrates together and nothing can take it away. But the truth was different. In the morning, I dressed carefully in a navy dress, the one I wore for important presentations. I called a car and told my team to prepare everything. We would need every server, every engineer, every ounce of energy to deliver on this contract. I believe my dad would be waiting with a handshake, a smile, maybe even pride in his eyes. I believe my brother would thank me for what this meant for all of us. I believe my family would finally see me not just as a daughter or a sister, but as the builder who had carried us here. I was wrong. The morning after I secured the $100 million deal, I walked into the Boston headquarters of Hart Industrial Supply with a kind of hope I had not felt in years. The glass doors reflected the bright winter sun, and for a moment, I let myself believe this was the start of something extraordinary. My heels clicked against the polished tile as I made my way to the main conference room, my heart beating fast but steady. I expected smiles, handshakes, maybe even congratulations from the people I had fought so hard to protect. Instead, I found silence. My father was already there, standing at the head of the table, his hands gripping the chair in front of him as though it were the only thing keeping him grounded. My brother Evan sat nearby with a folder open on the table, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes refused to meet mine. I hesitated in the doorway, sensing something colder than the January air hanging over the room. "Why is the buyer talking to you and not to me?" my dad asked. His voice was clipped, the kind of tone that was less a question and more an accusation. I forced myself to stay calm. "Because Oliver wanted to see the engine," I said. "And I wrote the engine. He wanted to understand how it works, and that's my work." "The old way worked fine," he snapped, as if every year of decline and near failure had been some kind of success. I met his gaze, steady but burning inside. "The old way would have sunk us during the storm. You know that. The only reason we survived was because of Beacon." His jaw tightened. Then, without a word, he slid a piece of paper across the table toward me. I looked down. It was a termination letter. My heart dropped. "Effective today," he said flatly. "Your team will now report to Evan. Your access card will be cut off at noon." He spoke each line like it had been rehearsed in his mind for weeks. Finally, he looked at me and delivered the blow that cracked something deep inside. "Your time is up. Get out." For a moment, I could not breathe. My chest felt tight, like the walls themselves had shrunk. My father's words rang in my ears, drowning out everything else. I forced myself to speak. "Why are you doing this?" His face hardened even more. "Because the company needs a steady hand. You've made me feel small in front of buyers. This is my business, and it will stay in the family the way it should. The father leads. The son follows. That is how family businesses stay strong." He did not say daughter. The omission cut deeper than the words themselves. I turned to Evan. "Why did you do this?" My voice cracked, raw with betrayal. He looked at the floor, avoiding my eyes. His fingers tapped nervously against the folder in front of him. When he finally spoke, it was barely more than a whisper. "It's already done." I felt the sting of tears, but I refused to let them fall in front of them. I gathered my coat, slipped my laptop into my tote, and walked out. My hands trembled even through my gloves, and when I reached the street, the cold air hit me like a wall. I leaned against the brick of the building, trying to catch my breath, trying not to break down where strangers could see. A woman walking a little dog paused, concern in her eyes. "Are you all right?" she asked. I nodded, though the truth was the opposite. Nothing about me was all right. The ride back to my brownstone felt endless. I stared out the window as the city blurred past, my mind racing, trying to piece together the betrayal I had just endured. When I finally stepped into my kitchen, the familiar warmth of home wrapped around me. I set my laptop on the island, made a cup of tea with shaking hands, and forced myself to open the files that mattered most. Beacon. The system that had built the empire, my father now claimed as his alone. I scrolled through the license agreements I had drafted and signed over the past 3 years. Every line was deliberate, every word crafted to protect the integrity of the software and the people who relied on it. Beacon did not belong to Hart Industrial Supply. It belonged to Beacon North LLC, the company I had created, and I was the sole owner. Hart had a perpetual license to use Beacon, but only as long as it complied with the terms: service fees, data integrity, and proper oversight of the product team. One clause stood out. Section 7. The guardrail. If the company ever changed control of the product team without my consent, Beacon would automatically enter safety mode. Safety mode was not destructive. It did not erase data or block employees from payroll and benefits. It simply paused all high-risk functions, large vendor wires, new contracts, and enterprise-level transactions until a release was signed or the product role restored. I had written that clause after one terrifying night when my father tried to push through a $3 million purchase without proper review. Back then, he laughed at me and said I was too cautious. I had called it the guardrail, and now he had driven straight into it. I took a long sip of tea, the bitterness grounding me. Then I picked up the phone and called our attorney, Melissa Chan. Her calm voice steadied me. I explained what had happened, and she agreed to stand by for whatever came next. I paid her retainer from my personal account without hesitation. Next, I drafted a short but clear notice to my father and Evan. I wrote, "For Section 7, Beacon will shift to safety mode at 7 a.m. Eastern tomorrow unless the product role is restored or a release is signed. I am willing to offer a 2-week transition, joint control during that period, and a board meeting on Monday to discuss further." This is not a threat. It complies with the contract. I read it twice, making sure every word was factual, professional, unshakable. Then I hit send. The hours crawled by after that. At 2 a.m, I found myself standing by the window of my brownstone, staring at the quiet Boston street below. Snowflakes drifted through the pale glow of the streetlights. I pressed my hand against the cold glass and let the silence soak into me. I thought of my mother, her gentle hands, her warm encouragement, the way she always believed in me when no one else did. I pulled out my phone and sent her a text. "I will be fine." A minute later, her reply appeared. Just a single red heart. I set the phone on the counter, wrapped myself in a blanket, and closed my eyes. Tomorrow, the storm would begin. But tonight, I let myself breathe in the stillness of my own home, reminding myself of one truth that had not changed. Beacon was mine, and they had no idea what was about to hit them. At 7 o'clock sharp the next morning, Beacon shifted into safety mode. I had built it to run exactly like this: calm, precise, and controlled. The system didn't crash. It didn't lock anyone out of payroll or health benefits. It simply slowed the river, narrowed the stream, and made sure nothing reckless could pass through. Payroll ran without issue. Health insurance was verified. Trucks that were already loaded pulled out of the lots and moved along their regular routes. But no new high-risk orders were approved. No vendor wires over $50,000 could clear. The London contract I had celebrated just 2 nights before was automatically flagged for legal review because the named product owner no longer matched. Beacon did exactly what it was supposed to do. Inside the Boston office, the reaction was anything but calm. At 9, my dad tried to push through a 90-day supply order worth $6 million. Safety mode blocked it, instantly throwing up a red banner that demanded compliance. The log captured everything. He called my phone within minutes, his voice shaking with fury. "You're destroying this family," he barked. I held my voice steady. "Sign the release or restore my role, and the system will return to normal within minutes. Until then, this is the guardrail you agreed to." He hung up on me. By noon, my inbox was full of messages from vendors. They weren't angry so much as unsettled. They wanted clarity, wanted to know whether the pause would last days, weeks, or longer. I responded to each one personally. I told them the truth, that the system could be restored the very same day if Hart Industrial met the license terms. I made no threats. I made no promises I couldn't keep. I simply told them this was a contract issue, not a collapse. Around 3 o'clock, I received a call from Oliver Grant in New York. His calm British voice was steady, but pointed. "Amelia, we won the contract, but we cannot sign with a company that doesn't have control of its own software license. Is there a lawful path forward?" "There is," I told him. "The license spells it out. If Hart restores the agreed role, safety mode lifts. If they won't, I have other options." He paused. "My team is willing to wait 48 hours. After that, we will have to reconsider." I thanked him, hung up, and sat back in my chair. My heart was pounding. It was surreal to think that two men, my father in Boston and a British investor in New York, were pulling me in opposite directions, each convinced they held the future in their hands. But only one of them knew how the system actually worked. At 5, I met Melissa Chon in her office near Boston Harbor. The sun was setting outside her window, the water reflecting streaks of gold. She greeted me in a gray suit, her voice calm and grounded. I explained everything, every detail of the safety mode, every clause in the license, every word my father had thrown at me. "You didn't pull a plug," she said firmly. "You enforced a contract. That's a big difference." Her words steadied me. She drafted a letter to the board, straightforward and professional. It laid out the facts. Beacon North LLC owned the software. Hart Industrial Supply was in temporary breach of the license. Safety mode was lawful and limited. A release would restore full functionality within minutes. Attached to the letter were the signed agreements, the audit logs, and screenshots that proved compliance. When I left her office, I didn't go back to my brownstone. Instead, I drove north, through the darkening roads of Vermont, until I reached the small lake house I had bought the year before. It had cost me $540,000, and I had chosen it for its solitude. The house had a dock, 2 green chairs by the water, and spotty cell service that felt like a blessing. That night, I lit a fire, curled up on the wooden floor with my knees pulled against my chest, and stared into the flames. I thought about the folding table in our living room where I had written the first lines of Beacon. I thought about the people who had trusted me, about every employee whose paycheck and insurance now depended on this system. The anger in me burned hotter than the fire, but it was not reckless anger. It was sharp, clean, and precise. It wanted only 2 things: to protect the people and to protect the work. At sunrise, I drove back to Boston. Trucks idled in the yard outside headquarters, their exhaust rising like ghosts in the cold morning air. Evan stood on the loading dock with a clipboard, his face pale, his eyes heavy. He looked older than his years. When he saw me, he hesitated before walking over. "Dad told me this would be simple," he said quietly, almost like a confession. "It is simple," I replied. "Sign the release, and the system opens back up." He shook his head. "He won't." The weight in his words hung between us. I turned away, my heart heavy, and drove into the city. By noon, my phone buzzed with messages that made my stomach twist. Competitors were already reaching out to our customers, whispering that Hart was in chaos, offering special terms to lure them away. That pain cut deeper than my father's betrayal. I had not built Beacon to see our people suffer. I sat in the back of a coffee shop, laptop open, hands on the keyboard. I began sketching a plan. If Hart would not sign the release, I would offer a clean split. Beacon North would form a new service company. We would hire any Hart employee who wanted to join us. We would not poach clients. We would not burn bridges. We would only support the small and mid-sized businesses that asked for help. We would keep people on payroll. We would keep children on health plans. I called it Project Lifeboat. At 4, Oliver called again. His voice was calm, but this time there was something new in it, a kind of resolve. "My partners in London had discussed a counterproposal," he said. "If Hart refuses to sign the release, We are willing to fund Beacon North directly. We would purchase the software assets and spin up a service division under your control. We can wire an initial $5 million by Friday, in pounds or dollars, whichever you prefer. My throat tightened. Why? I asked. Because, he said simply, we back builders. And you built this. I looked out at the harbor from my coffee shop window, the water dark and restless under the winter sky. Yes, I whispered. That evening, as the streetlights flickered on and Boston prepared for another cold night, an email from my father appeared in my inbox. It contained only one line, "You will not get a penny from my company." I read it once, then again, a third time. My chest ached, but I refused to let despair win. I took a deep breath, drafted a formal purchase offer for the software assets, and sent it to him anyway. If he wanted to see me as an enemy, so be it. I knew who I was. I was the builder. And the storm had only just begun. The board meeting took place on a gray Monday morning in a Boston hotel conference room. The space smelled faintly of coffee, carpet cleaner, and tension. Melissa sat firmly on my left, her presence steady, a quiet anchor in the storm. On my right sat Oliver Grant, his British calm as unshakable as ever. Across the table was my father, arms folded tight across his chest, his eyes fixed not on me, but on the papers in front of him. Beside him, Evan gripped a pen so hard I thought it might snap in two. Two outside directors had dialed in over video, their faces flickering across the large screen at the end of the table. I opened the meeting. My voice was firm, though inside my chest a storm raged. I want to be clear about what I built and how it is structured. Beacon is owned by Beacon North LLC. Hard Industrial Supply has only a license to use it. Safety mode is not a weapon. It's a guardrail. It protects the business from reckless actions. What I want is simple. Hart keeps its name, its trucks, and its sales team. Beacon North takes full ownership of the software and operates a service division. Every employee must have a safe place to land, whether here or with me. And the London contract, worth $100 million, must remain with the team that earned it. I paused, then added the line I had written during a sleepless night. We can fight and sink together, or we can split and both sail. Silence filled the room. Finally, my dad lifted his head. His voice was lower than I expected, carrying a heaviness I hadn't heard in years. When I started this company in Newark, I swept the floor with my hands. I carried boxes until my back gave out. I built this with sweat, not code. A father should never have to ask his daughter for permission to run his own company. His words were sharp, almost pleading. I let him finish, let him have the dignity of telling a story. But when he fell silent, I met his eyes. And a father should never fire his daughter on the very day she brings in $100 million. Melissa spoke next, her tone crisp, factual, unflinching. The license agreement is valid and binding. Safety mode will remain until the board approves a release or a sale. What Ms. Hart has described is lawful and enforceable. The outside directors began asking questions about contracts, about financial risk, about the future of client relationships. Oliver leaned forward, his voice calm and confident, answering each question with numbers. He laid out two simple sheets of paper. One showed the projected losses if the pause continued, millions bleeding away by the week. The other showed the projected gains if we executed the split. The difference was stark. The numbers did not lie. At noon, we took a short break. I walked out into the hallway, my legs heavy, my mind exhausted. As I stood by a tall window, Evan appeared beside me. He stared out at the city, his reflection pale in the glass. "I wanted your life," he whispered. "I thought Dad would love me more if I could run what you ran." The admission hit me harder than I expected. I turned to him, my voice softer than it had been in weeks. "You could have worked with me, Evan. We could have built it together." His eyes closed for a moment, his shoulders sagging. "I know," he said quietly. For the first time, I believed he meant it. When the board reconvened at 1, the air was different, heavier, but clearer somehow. The vote was cast. 3-2 in favor of approving the sale of Beacon's software assets and the creation of a service division under Beacon North. The purchase price was set at $42 million, paid in stages. Grant and Wexford would fund $20 million immediately and the remaining $22 million over the next 12 months. Hart Industrial Supply would keep a clean license with no safety mode provisions. The London contract, by unanimous agreement, would transfer to Beacon North. And every Hart employee would be given a choice: remain with Hart or join Beacon North with full credit for years served. I signed the papers with a steady hand. My father stood without looking at me. He paused at the door for a long moment. For one fleeting second, I thought he might turn, might tell me he was proud. But he didn't. He walked out, leaving only silence behind him. It hurt, it cut deeper than I wanted to admit, but it did not break me. 2 months later, my brownstone in Boston no longer felt like just my home. It had become the beating heart of something new. Boxes of monitors stacked against the walls, coats draped over chairs, laptops open on every surface. People I loved and trusted laughed over terrible coffee as they built the next version of Beacon. In just 8 weeks, Beacon North had hired 180 people. We opened a small office in Brooklyn and, across the Atlantic, a modest base in London's Shoreditch district with rent of £8,000 a month. The London contract flourished. In its second year, it grew to $150 million. From that growth, we set aside 10% of profits for employee grants, scholarships, and family emergencies. We invested in a new server farm in Virginia, a $3.4 million purchase, and named the racks after poets. Our Vermont lake house became a sanctuary for weekend retreats, canoes on the water, hot cocoa by the fire, team members rediscovering their sense of worth. I watched people who had once been afraid of layoffs and instability stand taller, speak louder, and smile more freely. Meanwhile, Hart Industrial Supply continued under my father's command. With the fight for control behind him, he rediscovered his old fire and grew sales again. Evan called me from time to time with questions about a routing rule, a feature request, a customer concern. I always answered. One evening, he came to my brownstone carrying a small wooden box. Inside was the folding table I had first coated Beacon on, sanded and sealed. "It was where you started," he said softly. I smiled and touched the smooth wood. It was where we started. On the first anniversary of the split, I stood in Beacon North's Boston office, gazing out over the harbor. Melissa handed me a framed copy of the first Beacon license, a reminder of both the battle and the victory. Oliver raised a paper cup of coffee and toasted. "To builders." The room erupted in cheers and laughter. In that moment, something inside me settled. Not triumph, not revenge. Something quieter, steadier, peace. A line that whispered inside me. I did not sink. I learned to steer. I still think often about that morning when my father fired me, and the company seemed to collapse overnight. It didn't collapse. It paused. That pause forced us to face the truth. My father wanted a story where a father and son stood at the helm. I wanted a story where the work and the people came first. In the end, we each got part of what we wanted. The rest is simply life. And now, sometimes late at night, I sit by my brownstone window, laptop open, writing code that no one else will ever see. Not for money, not for contracts, but for the joy of it. Boston is quiet at those hours, the harbor lights blinking across the water. I send a short text to my mother. I am safe. The company is safe. Her reply comes within minutes, as steady as her love has always been. A simple heart, and then a line that makes me smile in the dark.
Keep building.